We've now supply and demand models, the supply and demand curves, and explain maybe some of the differences between movements along the supply curve or the demand curve and shifts of the said curves. So let's get right to it. All these markets we're talking about are competitive markets where there are many buyers of sellers of the same good and service. Think of an agricultural market, like the market for wheat, for instance. The supply and demand model is a model of how this competitive market works. Let's start off with the demand schedule, which is the quantity demanded per price. As you can see, as the price of cotton, I guess the book's going to use cotton in this instance, as the price gets higher, the demand gets lower. So you'll see the demand at $2 is 7.1, but as it gets down to 50 cents, the demand almost doubles. So this kind of leads us to the law of demand, which pretty much states that the higher the price of a good, other things being equal, leads people to demand a smaller quantity of the good. As you can see, as the price goes up, there's a smaller quantity demanded there. Now the law of demand will imply that demand is always downward sloping. The demand curve always slopes downward. So the higher the price, the less that the consumers want. And that makes sense. You know, if just think of any good that you want. If the price is too high, you're going to want less of it. People go back to pizza from the example from a chapter or two ago. If the cost of a pizza is $10, you may buy 2 of them for you and your friends. If it's $20, well, then you may only buy 1. So, you know, it just makes good sense. So here we could see the increase in demand, and now this is where the demand curve shifts. Now you can see that between 2007 and 2010 there was an increase in quantity demanded. It looks like there were some other factors involved, maybe the technology involved in making, or the increase in population rather. Sorry, I was thinking of supply there. So if there's more people in the world, there's going to be more people wanting cotton clothing. Jeans are really popular. You know, cotton shirts, of course. So you'll see even at every price from 2007 to 2010, the demand curve has shifted to the right. That means we've seen an increase in demand. Now this is where many students get hung up. There's a very big difference between a change in the quantity demanded and a change in the demand curve itself. So movement along the demand curve is just the movement in quantity demanded because of changes in price. You'll see from point A to point B. Point A, the cotton is priced at $1.50. And point B, it's priced at $1. This change in price leads to an increase in the quantity demanded because the price is lower, the quantity demanded is lower, 8.1 compared to 9.7 billions of pounds. That's a lot of pounds. Whereas between point A and point C, there is an increase or a shift of the whole curve itself. So in point A might have been in 2007 when there were so many, like 5 billion people in the world, whereas in point C is maybe where there were 6 billion people in the world in 2010. More people in the world means more demand at every point along the curve. So D2 is this shift in demand, and it can go the other way. It can move backwards as well for some other reason. So again, a shift in the demand curve is not the same thing as movement along the demand curve, and this is very important to realize. Now, and we could also, this shows the decrease in demand curve, and that's a leftward shift of the demand curve. There's also the increase. Again, just to drive that point home, the demand curve can shift in either direction, and that could be because of the price of related goods. Two goods are substitutes, for example. Two goods are substitutes if a fall in the price of one of the goods makes consumers less willing to buy the other good. Think of pizza and hamburgers. If you're going out to eat and you were going to, there's the demand for hamburgers. If the price of pizza falls, that means more people are going to be more apt to buy pizza instead of hamburgers, which means the demand for hamburgers will fall. You can notice all of my examples involve food. I probably should eat dinner at some point. Complements is another change in price of related goods. Two goods are complements if the fall in the price in one good makes people more willing to buy the other good. So when you're talking about, we'll just use my food example, cereal and milk. So if the fall in price of milk will make people more willing to buy cereal. So that would shift the demand there because it's substitute. What do you need with cereal usually? Milk. So more people would be willing to buy milk or cereal if the fall in price of milk. There's changes to income is another example of this. And we have normal goods versus inferior goods. And these sound, unlike that whole positive normative thing, these sound exactly what they are. A good example of this is public transportation. With normal goods, you would think of car. So maybe the price of gas. When your rise in income increases the demand for good, forget the gas thing, sorry. So as your income increases, your demand for the normal goods, such as a car, would increase. If you lose your job and you don't have any income, you may not be wanting to use your car as much. You might want to be taking the bus. So when your rise in income, so if you get your job, you're not going to take that bus anymore. So when the rise in income decreases the demand for goods, such as public transportation, it is known as an inferior good. Tastes and expectations are another thing that the book goes into a little better than I would explain right now. And if you're having any trouble, please let me know and I can help explain that. The individual demand curves make up the market demand curves. That should hopefully be self-explanatory, whereas each person's demand curves adds up together, and it will be the complete demand. So let's go back into supply. You see supply is the exact opposite demand. As the price for something rises, the price that you can sell it for, the supply will go up. This makes sense. If you can sell cotton for 50 cents, you might only have 8 billion pounds sold. But if these cotton sellers can sell their cotton for $2 a pound, the quantity of cotton will rise to just above about 12 billion there. So that leads us to the law of supply. As the costs or the price that a supplier can get rises, the quantity supplied also rises. This is, of course, and I will say this again, the inverse, the opposite of the law of demand. And again, please keep in mind there's a difference between the change along the supply curve and a change in the supply curve. So say there was new technology involved to help the cotton growing business. More cotton producers are able to join the market. This would be a shift in the whole entire supply curve after the new technology. Remember how the demand curve shifted when the population grew and there was more cotton or demand for cotton in the world. This is a higher supply of cotton because of the new technology. And again, this is different than the movement along the supply curve, where if we're just changing the price of cotton, the quantity supplied will change. If we're changing technologies or input prices or something like that, every point along the supply curve will shift. So you can see the supply curve shifts can be an increase or a rightward shift or a leftward shift. And again, just like the shift in demand curve, there are some things that causes the supply curve to shift. One of them was the input price. If you need wheat for that cereal that I was talking about, say cornflakes. So if you need, or I guess that'd be corn, right? If you need corn for cornflakes, if the market for corn skyrockets, the price of corn goes up by double, the price of cornflakes is going to go up to produce it, which means you're going to supply less of it. Other things, such as the change of technology we saw with the cotton, allows the supply curve to shift to the right. So there's, it can go either way. There's changes in expectations of the market. There's changes in the price of related goods and services, and the number of producers. And again, I hope this part is pretty simple. The individual supply curve and the market supply curve. The market is simply the sum of the individual supply curve. This leads us to one of the last points of this chapter, which is supply-demand in equilibrium. Equilibrium is when the quantity demanded of a good equals the quantity supplied of that good. The price at which this takes place and the quantity of the good, we have the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. As you can imagine, if the demand curve is sloping down and the supply curve is sloping up, you have your equilibrium price and quantity at the point where they intersect, which is equilibrium. So the book wants us to understand that why this point is called equilibrium, and I think that there's a good message here. So let's suppose you have a price, you try to price something, or the price of the market for cotton is higher than the actual equilibrium price. So instead of $1, which is the equilibrium price, the market for some reason is at $1.50. What happens? There's a surplus. As you can see here, if you go across, there's a surplus of this good because there are more people trying to supply this cotton at $1.50 than the people who are willing to buy it here. So this whole point, or that area, is the surplus. Conversely, there can be a shortage if the price is lower than you expect. And this makes sense because if the price is lower than equilibrium, there are going to be more people demanding cotton than there are people supplying it, because they, for 75 cents, you can't get as much money as you would think you would be able to in the equilibrium. So the quantity demanded exceeds the quantity supplied, and this would be a shortage, and that's when the price is below the equilibrium level. So what's going to happen in this level? Why is it called equilibrium? Because slowly but surely, whether it's a shortage or a surplus, this price is going to creep back up to $1. There's going to be less or more people as the suppliers realizing that they can get more or a higher price for their cotton because there's this shortage and this excess demand. So as the suppliers start raising their price, the demand, the consumers are going to start demanding less as this price creeps up until it reaches the point of equilibrium. Finally, the book also wants us to know what happens to shifts of the demand curve. So if the demand curve were to shift higher because of maybe, like we said, the cotton, the shift in population, increase in population leads to more people wanting cotton. This means that the price will increase. So and vice versa, if the demand shifted to the left, the price would decrease. Let's check on supply. So say there's a bad cotton crop which led to a decrease in supply. And that's why when there is whenever you hear reports of a bad crop of some sort of product, the price increases. And you can see it demonstrated on this graph. The shift in supply leftward, the supply curve leads the equilibrium price to rise up to here. Sometimes there are technology shifts of the supply curve as well, and that leads us to a lower equilibrium, which means more quantity demanded, lower price. Every time the demand or the supply shifts, check out the new equilibrium point and go to that point on quantity, supply and demand, and price. And there you will find your answer. There will be a lot of questions on the homework or the tests, and I recommend the best way to the best way to figure this out, is to actually draw out these curves. That's the way I learned it, is just to draw out the curve. Don't try to do it in your head. Just draw out the curve, supply curve 1, supply curve 2, and find out what happened. So sometimes you could say that there's simultaneous shifts of supply and demand. And this is kind of where it gets confusing, and drawing out these curve shifts helps you. So it's possible that if demand curve shifts to the right because of a large increase in demand, but there's a small decrease in supply, that looks like the price rose and the quantity demanded also rose. But there are different situations where the opposite can happen, depending on how great of a shift in supply or demand there is. So again, my best advice to you is to just draw out the supply and demand curve shifts as best you can. Here's a handy little chart for you on the PowerPoint. And I think that's about the best advice I have for this chapter. So I hope you learned all you could about supply and demand, because it could be, if not is, the most important chapter in this book. See you in chapter 4.